We have some wonderful speakers here. Kaz Clark and Gary Jones, and both of them are really fantastic. I had them on my show very recently, so if you want to get more background after tonight or today, you can go on my website and listen and watch the video interview I did with them. I then invited them to speak here today, rather last minute actually. They were an add-on. I think we had a speaker who couldn't make it or something, and so I was able to bring them here, which is wonderful. And this story, this Pentyrch, is that? Pentyrch, okay. Well, okay, I'm obviously completely can't, pronounce it properly. But anyway, it happened in Wales, from what I understand, and they're going to explain everything about it. Kaz herself was not what you call a UFO, avid ufologist or any of that stuff at the time that it happened to her. And it was quite fascinating to talk to someone like that, because this is such a major incident. It's really up there with Rendlesham, that whole, it's like one of these big incidents in which there are lots of pieces to it. And it happened in 2016, so it's not so long ago. And it involved, I guess, a pyramid-shaped craft, which is quite interesting. And those tend to be quite an interesting dynamic. And so many other things. So without further ado, I just want to say that she is very brave, so please do honor her today. She's been approached by the British government and MI6 and other agent types, actually telling her to shut up, and not to go further, not to speak out. She's had threats to her family directly to her face, and she'll detail all of that. And I'm not sure if Gary has had anything similar, but I'm sure he can say. Gary is a researcher from Swansea, which is an organization that investigates these kinds of things as well. So the two have become a sort of a team investigating this wonderful, really elaborate sighting that does reveal a battle with ETs in essence, and U.S. aircraft was involved as well as British. So here we go. Give them a hand, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to say a massive thank you to Kerry Cassidy. It's an absolute privilege to be here and an honour. And secondly, I want to say a massive thank you to Swansea UFO Network and Emlyn Williams, Mike Mwanda and Gary Jones, because without their professionalism and their patience and their support, this story would never have been told. In fact, it was 18 months after the event and I hadn't spoken to anybody about it, and Swansea came to find me.
So we're going to ask you to talk a little louder. Can everyone hear in the back?
Can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. Okay. Forgive me if I stumble tonight, today I should say. I'm not used to public speaking, and my physical health has been affected by being in close proximity to one of these things. I do believe I had some form of post-traumatic stress as well, which was one of the reasons why I took a lie detector test, primarily for myself, so I could be honest with my doctors and with my consultants about what had really happened to me. And I needed them to take me seriously and not look at me like I'm some kook or get me committed. You'd think that taking a lie detector would be the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's not. You think, pay your penny, take the test, get your result, job done. No. There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. You can't be on drugs, you can't be on medication, you can't suffer with certain medical conditions. Certainly if you've got a mental health problem, you can't take one. And I tried the 2 best companies in Europe first, and when they found out the subject matter, they refused to test me. So I went for the best in the country, the best forensic polygraph examiner in the country. And I'd learnt some valuable lessons from the first 2 attempts at trying to get a lie detector. So I actually refused to discuss the situation with the secretary or with anybody else, and only with my examiner. Well, the plot was set. I'd paid my money. I waited for the phone call, which came the very next day. And I was told to write a statement on exactly what I wanted to be tested on. And it had to be completely accurate. Any fabrication or exaggeration would have impacted upon my test and proved to be a lie. There were 3 primary questions and 15 profile questions. You know, was I in Cardiff? Was my name Kaz? Did I lie about any of the content? That's my entire statement. I answered no. Had I lied about any of the details? We're talking details now. This thing was less than 20 feet away from me. I answered no. And regarding my statement, was I lying about any of my observations? Did I see what I said I saw? Now, lie detectors work on fact, not fiction, meaning it had to be a real event and not just something I thought or just believed. The equipment I used, or I should say was used, is called a Lafayette 5000. It is the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art equipment used by US police, the state and federal Canadian governments, the UK government, our intelligence services, across the world. I used their facility so that they couldn't say to me, your lie detector is worthless. This is what our government used. And I passed to prove what I said I saw was real and what I said I saw was true. And there were no fabrications or exaggerations in my test. Thank you. The event started for me on Tuesday, the 23rd of February 2016. And I noticed this small grey twin propeller plane flying above my small village. I live on top of a mountain. Now we have RAF St. Athan just down the road from me, and to see a military plane isn't out of the ordinary. So on the Tuesday I'd seen it and didn't pay it any mind after that. It was the Wednesday morning when my neighbour Dave came out of his house. I won't actually say what he said, but he wasn't a very happy bunny after being kept awake all night by this plane flying over his house every 15 minutes. And it was then really that I started to notice the behaviour of this plane. And another plane would turn up and take its place, and the first plane would leave. They never left the airspace unwatched, not even for a minute. And to this date, the Ministry of Defence have not recognised that these planes were there at all. At all. We checked the radar, and it's been insinuated that Llantrisant was the centre, and Llantrisant is just behind there. And Pentyrch is right under here. You can't even see it because there's so many crossovers of this figure-of-8 flight pattern that they were using. And then occasionally it would go out into a big circle and come back and continue this figure-of-8 pattern. Now, when someone has pointed out a noise to you, that's all you can hear. So all Wednesday night, that's all I could hear were these propeller planes going over my house every 15 minutes of the night. By Thursday morning, we'd really started to watch, and we decided then that we'd eliminated everything else. They must be watching for something. Now, Dave was convinced that they were watching for Russians, because at the time, they were sailing that antique Russian aircraft carrier in our waters. So we watched to see what was going on. And it was freezing. It was February. And I was just about to go in. It got to about 2 a.m. And the second plane turned up. Well, first of all, I checked the airspace. I beg your pardon. From my IP address, there was no data available. And clearly, there were planes above my house. Clearly, they were showing. They also closed the entire country's airspace. So not just around the South Wales, but the entire country. As the time approached, the search area got smaller. And I was just about to go in, bored of watching this little plane flying around. And we heard this coming. Right? Sounded like a missile, really fast, really loud, and as it went past me, the roar of its engines as it went past, it was a full moon night. This plane banked around to the left-hand side and illuminated the mushroom on its back. And Dave immediately exclaimed, "Oh, that's an E3 Sentry plane." It means absolutely nothing to me. If it's not a Cessna, I don't know what it is. I'm not a plane spotter or a train spotter, and to be honest, I don't want to be either. So it meant absolutely nothing to me. But I thought, well, this is heating up. Come on, we'll stay a bit longer. So I threw another chair leg on the fire, and we watched a bit longer. And this big plane started to do circles. Now, bearing in mind, I live on top of a mountain, so I can see in every direction but north, because that's where the mountain is. And we counted as this plane started to go around, and it took about 5 minutes for this big plane to go around once. 7 times that plane went around before the first red light was visible high above the trees behind my house. And I called for Donna, one of my other neighbours who was watching with us that night, and she'd gone in to make hot chocolates. I didn't get an answer, so I shouted for Dave, and we jumped over the small little wire fence and ran to the gate that overlooked the farmland behind my house. It's literally, I could walk it in 30 seconds. So running it, we got there in 10 seconds. And this one red light turned into 3. And what was starting to appear in front of us was a giant pyramid that had come in point first on an oblique angle with a leading set of 6 lights on its undercarriage, turning very slowly anti-clockwise until it righted itself in front of us. And when it did, a green object shot out of the top really fast. I couldn't tell you what shape it was. It was so bright, brighter than the moonlight. It illuminated everything. And it just stayed there, swinging backwards and forwards, rocking, waiting, watching for something. It clearly saw us. The pyramid itself started to list to the right-hand side, and still turning very slowly anti-clockwise, started to move back the way it had come. And I stood on the 5-bar gate to get a better look through the bare trees, because it's still winter time. And I exclaimed to Dave, it's landing, thinking it was coming down, when in actual fact the field rises there because it's the foot of the Garth Mountain. And I said previously that it was like a hand of lightning that came out of it to touch the ground, but it was more like a plasma ejection trying to stop itself from touching the ground. And the whole craft lit up really, really brightly, showing it was 3-dimensional and not 2-dimensional. This wasn't just a string of lights. This was a solid ship that created light and shadow on its sides, like it was textured somehow, like a rock face. I heard the military planes coming, 2 big, heavy, twin propeller planes. I think they were C-17s. And I looked up, I was still standing on the gate as these 2 big planes flew over the top of me, and when I looked back, I couldn't see the pyramid anymore, but the green object was still there. 2 further planes came from my left-hand side and flew above the trees, turned and went back behind the 2 planes that had gone previously. So now you have 2 planes in close and 2 planes out wide, and they took up an awful lot of airspace between them. And this green object flashed 3 really bright strobes at these planes and then started to skip away towards Llantrisant. We watched until we couldn't see it anymore, and the E3 Sentry was still above us. Just behind the trees, we could see something red moving. We didn't know what it was, but we stared. And these 2 red barrel-shaped objects, about the size of a small car, started moving across the fields towards us. One going from my left and stopped above the hedge about 30 feet up and 30 feet away from me, and just stopped there. And the other one was moving to my right. The one to my left, I stared at just for a few seconds because I wanted the details, and I was looking at it. I could see the insides moving like white noise on a TV screen on a red background. And I looked to see where the other one was, but that one hadn't stopped. And that was next to the oak tree, right next to me. right next to me and came over the top of me and stopped and scanned us both. I waved. I didn't know what else to do. That has to be the universal hello, has to be. And this thing changed colour. It went from tail light red to traffic light green. Seriously. And still stayed there. And just paused for that moment. And I could clearly see white noise. And there was no downdraft, no noise, no nothing from these things. They were just lights. After it turned green, as I said, it paused just for a moment before it drifted off to my right-hand side over the houses. And the red one that was still red didn't move until the green one moved. And that went down to my left across the fields and faded to black. Now, I don't know if it disappeared or if it turned its light off or if it cloaked itself. I just couldn't see it anymore. Now, this is what we refer to as the first gate. And I was standing on this gate here, my feet on the bottom rung there, top second rung, I should say. And I reenacted this. I stood on the gate and raised my hand because this branch here is where that red barrel came. And where I've taken this photograph from, 30 feet up, is where that red barrel stopped. Now, this is the branch that you can see in this picture. So this barrel came right down here, and I'm standing on this gate. You tell me how close that is, because I don't know. I genuinely don't. That's close. There's a view from the other side of the gate. And this is the tree line. This is where this big pyramid came in, here. And there's a second gate down here, which I'll refer to in a moment. But we walked down to the second gate, because Dave said he saw 15 or 20 of these barrel-shaped objects come out the top of it. Now, I didn't see any of that. And I can stand here and tell you that I did, but I genuinely didn't. I was so fixated on it touching the ground, and this thing was so big that whilst I'm looking at the bottom, you can't see the top. And I've described it like a high-rise building that lent into our world from somewhere else. Because this thing didn't decloak. This thing came through a veil into our existence, into our dimension. For example, if it was a high-rise building and you watch the man go through the front door, you certainly don't see the man jump off the roof, and vice versa. And I'm lucky that I had Dave with me, because Dave saw these things come out, and I didn't. So that's where they came from. But we walked down to the second gate, because Dave said he saw 15 or 20 of them. Where they went, I don't know. So by the time we got there was nothing to see. It was completely black. And it's so wet and slippery and uneven underfoot. This is a mountain in the middle of the night. We walked back to the first gate, and we could hear the helicopters coming. And people have, they've been here all day. People have asked how it is that I can see so much from where I live, but clearly I live on top of a mountain. The helicopters were 3 of them, Apache helicopters. They came across these fields very slowly, big red pulsing lights in front of them, quite slowly, heading in the direction of Llantrisant in an attempt to intercept the green object that had been herded in one direction, I should say, by 4 military planes. Meanwhile, the E3 Sentry is still above us. Now, after this, we went down to the second gate to see if there was anything more. We ran when we saw the helicopters and they disappeared off this edge. We ran around the front of the houses thinking we'd get a better view straight up the valley, but by the time we got there, they'd already gone. So we went back to my house, and Dave was physically shaking. And for some reason, I wasn't afraid. It was like a giant hand had reached inside and took the fear away from me. Like I'd been touched. I can't explain that. After we had a hot drink, we didn't really say a lot. You'd expect us to, but we really didn't. We were still in shock and awe of what we'd seen. Dave went home, and I went to bed. Not that I could sleep. And I tossed and turned and lay there. And this huge explosion from the direction of Llantrisant. Now, Llantrisant's about 5 miles away from me. So that is some explosion that I can hear it in Pentyrch. Now, I don't know how or when I fell asleep, but I do remember waking up the next morning wired. And Donna, my neighbour, came over, and Dave came over, and I called my friend Steve, a lifelong friend, and he came over, and we went straight over to the landing field, or near landing field, to see what we could find, expecting to see burn marks on the ground. What we saw was that all the gorse bushes had had all of the life sucked out of them, and the trees that this thing had gone over were dead. Now, there is some very high EMF readings still in those fields, and radiation 2 years after the event. So the radiation on the night would have been extremely high. But the interesting factor was, it was snowing in that field. Nothing unusual there, only it wasn't snowing in the surrounding fields. You could stand on the edge and watch and hear the snow landing in front of you, but not on you. And we walked all the way around. Donna said it wasn't like snow at all, like spongy balls, like marshmallow, that you can pick it up and squeeze it between your fingers and it would stay there and then dissolve. Dave said it was more like plastic pellets, not like snow at all. But there wasn't any snow forecast for that day, and it snowed in that field for 2 days. When we got back to the house, my house, Dave had been on the internet, and straight away, Wales Online, who are our big news agency over there, put a thing up how military planes and helicopters kept parts of South Wales awake. Some kind of military exercise. Well, because I'm new to all of this, I feel like a lost child in a new world. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I believed, everything I understood is in the bin. I don't know anyone anymore. I don't know anything anymore. My whole world has been turned upside down. For real. So I put a comment on there. Thanks for sharing this, but I can categorically state that this was no exercise. Last night I saw absolutely everything, and what they were chasing were not planes. This is on the day. I will take a lie detector anywhere for anyone, but what I witnessed last night will stay with me for the rest of my life. What is more, the military knew they were coming and had a spotter plane in the air for 2 days waiting for the event. And when it came, 4 planes chased the green object, whilst the spotter plane circled approximately 6 red oval objects, which formed a pyramid shape. Several spears hovered silently above the fields until the helicopters came. Now, you can't write this. I had a debunker called himself the Smoking Man. The Smoking Man, okay? LOL, good one. Yeah. Yeah, it was good, because I love sarcasm. It was good, in fact. It was amazing. You should use the name The Smoking Man after all. Isn't it his job to debunk real events? Answer this. When did they use live ammunition in an exercise in a residential area? Answer, never. And one other thing. They may have chased and shot down the green object, but they didn't get the red ones, did they? Because they're all still here. And then Agent Fox Mulder decided to get involved. Actually, it's my job. Hello? You couldn't write it. Now, a lot of people have said, well, there must have been loads of stuff on social media. Oh, there was. I'm assuming this is your chopper that kept us awake for hours on end. Nightmare, there is an explosion at 3-ish, you know. Is there something going on over Pentyrch at the moment? 4 a.m, 3 helicopters circling for hours to keep us all awake. But this went on. And on. But what I found really interesting was that Wales Online was still working on a story about this. Well, if this was a military exercise, you'd think the media would have known. But what I found interesting was the comments of Pentyrch Common, which is where our starting point was the very next day, or the very same day, I should say, to go and see what happened at the other end, for my own curiosity. Not because I knew there was going to be a big investigation, but I wanted to know what happened to this thing. This is Pentyrch Common. When we got there, Steve drove me over there, and Dave took his own car. All the scrap metal that had been on the common for years, bits of old car, been there 10 years, you know, all neatly stacked up along the roadside here. Very neat piles. A meticulous metal search had gone on the common that night. and anything that they didn't want, they discarded. And there was yellow search tape tied randomly on bushes right across the common. And it wasn't really until we got to Smilog Woods that we understood what the yellow tape was about. And whilst we were up there, I saw a couple of dog walkers, and I asked Steve to pull the car over so I could go and chat to them, bearing in mind, this is the morning after the night before. Had anybody heard anything about helicopters, explosions, you know? Anyway, I was told that Chinook helicopters with troops had landed behind the Royal Mint on Planchison Common, obviously, for this search. And there were 2 explosions. One air explosion and one secondary explosion that sounded like something hit the ground. Well, we don't know what they shot this thing with, whether or not, as Linda Moulton Howe has said, it was some kind of energy weapon, but they certainly shot at something next to a hospital where patients were shaken in their beds, where they believed a bomb had gone off in the building. That's how violent the shaking was. They're registered on the Richter scale 40 miles away. This, when they said that the second explosion had come from Smilog Woods, I asked where Smilog Woods were because I'm not from there. So they pointed to this large wooded hill that goes on for miles and rises behind the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. So Steve and I decided immediately that we would go to Smilog Woods. And because I knew the trajectory of the green craft, which started in Pentyrch, went across the common, and ended up, I believe, in Smilog Woods, in a completely straight line. And if you continued this straight line, the section of the M4 motorway that was closed that night was the only section whereby, if this thing had continued in a straight line, would have crossed. Anyway. And Steve and I got to Smilog Woods because I knew the direction of the green object. We knew roughly where to start looking, bearing in mind that Smilog Woods runs for miles and would take an entire team a whole day to search the entire place. And we found the debris trail, but because the place was so big, we decided we'd go back and tell Dave and Donna what we'd seen, and made a plan for the very next day to go back to Smilog Woods, pick up the debris trail from the day before, and follow it to its end. The debris trail was strewn left and right of us. All of these branches come from the canopies. As you can see by these pictures, nothing grows on the forest floor. No light gets through. This is all Forestry Commission. Only the top 12 feet of the trees are really covered in any kind of green at all. When we got to the end, this is what we were looking for. Sorry, I'm trying to get this thing to play. It's not a very good shot, but then we didn't expect to be here today. Sorry. Trees have been snapped off. 60 feet in the air. Sorry, 20 feet in the air, 60 feet trees. Healthy trees. Now it takes an enormous amount of kinetic energy to snap one tree. But to snap 6 trees, 60 feet high, mid-trunk, is an impossibility in nature. If a tree snaps in its trunk, it will fold in slow motion, and a lot of the time will still remain attached to the main trunk, but won't be shattered. There are burn marks on the tops of the trees up here. I'm sorry that's going to turn sideways now, but I do have some better shots of that, so I will try and sort that out for you. Okay. I tried to do some close-ups. There are an awful lot of branches, canopies missing, but we'll get to that. Oh, it's another video. Sorry. I'm not very good at this, am I? I was never born to be a speaker. Okay. This is one of the 60-foot trees. There are actually 2 here. There's one down this way and one going across this way too. Healthy trees, 60 foot long, 12-inch trunks, snapped 20 feet in the air. Clean. Something hit these trees hard. Now, all of the trees where the canopies were taken out All of the trees, without exception, have been felled by the Forestry Commission. Here are the 6 trees that were snapped, not sawn. 5 people were recently killed in a car accident because they hit a tree. A little bit of bark came off, but it didn't snap. It is an impossibility in nature, just for these few trees to be affected. Some of the trees still standing have the canopies still out of them. These canopies have been snapped off, not cut, snapped. Whatever came in at a high altitude. And for every tree that thing hit, it slowed down. And I don't believe it hit the ground. I believe it wedged itself in these trees where it stayed until the military came to get it out. And that gives you an idea of how high up this incident is. You'd need a ladder to get up there. Now these are some of the burn marks and scrape marks that were on the surrounding trees. And these pictures don't really do it justice, even though this was taken the very next morning. Bright orange, but a silver grey white stripe that went right through the centre of it, which is really strange. But you also see all the scuff marks on the trees all around. Again, some of the scuff marks where something has rubbed against these trees hard. But this one I tried to enhance. This is a 2-foot wound by a foot wide, and all of this is the wood curled outwards towards you, implying something very heavy and very hard has pulled upwards against that tree to make that wood curl outwards. And this tree, only this tree, has been felled. Today, it looks like this. All of the trees in front are gone. And this is the area here that it's impacted. Again, some of these trees, where it's hit, are still, well, the trunks are still there. So you can clearly see. So we wanted to know why these trees were felled. The only reason I could think of is because all the canopies were taken out of these trees because the green object hit them. So Gary wrote to the National Resources for Wales for me, and they told us that it was larch disease, or Phytophthora ramorum. And it's such an infectious disease, it's already started to spread into other species. And it's so dangerous that they have very strict protocols on how to deal with this stuff. They have to do what they call a sanitized felling. Well, sanitized felling involves clearing everything. Everything. They've got to wear coveralls, they have to wear protective covers on their shoes, they have to wash all the equipment, it has to be taken away by a licensed contractor. It can't be just left, as this is today, Smilog Woods. This is the area that's been left with branches, trunks, and what's also written is that they're supposed to leave this land free and fallow for 3 years minimum. But they've already replanted it. So I pointed out some of these new trees that they've put in because they planted them amongst all of this debris. Well, if it was larch disease, there shouldn't be anything there at all. Again, another picture highlighting all the new saplings that they've put in and showing you the trunks, the stumps, and all the branches that they've left there. This is not a sanitized felling. And today, this is the area of the impact zone, and it is all still dead. Nothing grows there. And we believe high EMF readings are responsible for that. We've been up there, we've done the tests, we know there's high EMF. It follows the exact same trail. All the branches are dead inside of this area. And I put in a couple of examples to show you the effects of EMF on trees, and it is quite evident that trees die around these things. Trees cannot grow around cell towers or high EMF readings. Moving on just a little bit. Shortly after the event, we had some very strange people come and camp in the fields behind my house. I, as a resident, wasn't told about any planning application or change for use of land. And I only found out about them, even though they were camped behind my house, because of our local hub, the Pentyrch hub. And a few of the residents had said they'd been given different reasons, explanations as to who these people were, which piqued my curiosity, as you can see. So, being a bit nosy, I called Steve, and Steve came to my house, and I said, look, I want to go over there and see what's going on. He said, fine. He said, grab the dog. We'll take the dog for a walk. So off we went. They'd said, one, that they were a fracking survey team, which really went down well with the residents. Then they said that they were doing a military exercise in case of a catastrophe. And lastly, and this is absolutely priceless, that they were Vodafone. Great. Great. Okay, you're Vodafone. So Steve and I walked over to the first gate that you've seen in a previous picture. And he says, we walked over to the gate and I saw two soldiers in full digital camos walking towards us along the trail. We walked through the gate towards the soldiers, and one soldier said, we're doing a military exercise in case of an emergency situation down in the fields, if you see any funny business going on down there. The dog was pulling on the lead, and as the other soldier got close and jumped up on him, the soldier bent down to stroke the dog, and as he did so, his jacket fell open that he had propped under his left arm and exposed a gun. The dog growled, so I pulled her back. The gun looked brand new and didn't have a yellow cap in the end of the barrel, so I think they were carrying live rounds. I was shocked. Kaz said, you need guns for that, do you? The other soldier turned around and he had the same gun under his arm with the stock sticking out the back. He said, yes, we do. Kaz said, why are you hiding them? He said, we don't want to upset the locals. Well, I'm a local. Tell me more, you know. So with that, I wanted to go into their camp. I wasn't happy with the explanation. So off we went. And here it is. It doesn't look much like a military camp, does it? You can take the man out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the man, can you? That you couldn't get your foot between these tents. The drawstrings are absolutely perfect and in perfect line, you know. They have this equipment tent. There's a green tent behind here, which is the canteen tent. And behind that, which I didn't get a picture of, was the control tent, where the commanding officer sat. And I'll tell you about him in a bit, because we had a really good conversation. Anyway, I walked around the perimeter of the field, because I didn't want to get too close to start with. And I said to Steve after a bit, oh, sod this. I said, I want to get across. Let's go. And as I did so, this big dog, couldn't tell you what breed it was, but came charging out of one of the tents towards me. And I said to Steve, please pick my little dog up. I don't want her to get, bitten or anything. And then shouted at the men that I could see two men in camp. I said, you know country boys, are you? They were like, what? Oh, that was my in. He answered me. Off I went, straight up through the middle of their camp to see what was going on. And I said, the farmer around here's got a shotgun. And I said, he's a pretty good shot, and it is lambing season. I strongly recommend you put your dog on a lead. So I asked them who they were, and they told me they were Vodafone. Sitting there in military uniform, and you're Vodafone. Okay. So since I've been there, in 10 minutes, I've been given two explanations. They're either doing a military exercise, or they're Vodafone. Okay. So Steve and I decided, right, okay, we'll go back and we'll tell Donna, one of my other neighbours who I'm quite close with, what was going on. Well, she wasn't entirely happy that we didn't get that many pictures, so grabbed the dog, poor dog, and got dragged out again for a second walk. And Dave also had gone over there. He, before me, he said, took a walk over the fields to have a look at the tents, and they had a lot of equipment there. They had satellite dishes, huge aerials, lots of other tech with screens and wires. I did try and ask one bloke what they were doing, but he was very hesitant to tell me anything and kept looking behind him as if he was making sure nothing was in my sight. After realising this man didn't want to speak to me, I walked on and looked back, and he was staring at me as if to make sure I'd left the field. They arrived in Enterprise vans and Land Rovers, and they were there for the best part of a week. You could hear them calling out in the middle of the night, as you can hear a pin drop around here. Now, these people behaved in the strangest way. If you walked down the track, every single one of them would stop what they were doing and just stand there and stare at you until you were out of sight, like some weird cult 60s movie. Honestly, like they'd just landed, honestly. Anyway, going back to Donna, sorry about that, because I did miss a slide. Donna said, I walked towards the end of the field I was in and went over the fence and through some garlic field and came out on the quarry. There's a disused quarry right at the back of us. And the roadway, I'll explain now, is a little bit higher than the quarry itself. So Donna was able to get around it underneath these people without them seeing her. So, but, sorry. As I could go around without anyone seeing me, I was able to get underneath the ridge where the car was. That's the Land Rover that was parked at the top. They had 3 large laptop-type equipment. But they weren't laptops. They were thick and big. I believe, and it's only my belief, that they were triangulating a satellite of some kind. Why else would you need 3? But anyway, I don't know who these people were. Nobody does. They certainly were trying to behave like civilians. So these men and women, as I said, behaved in a very strange way. And they were doing a fingertip search. Donna came back and said they were doing a fingertip search in the landing field wearing forensic suits. Well, Steve and I discussed going over to Skywatch that evening to see what they were doing. And he brought his camera and we stood there and we could see one of the guys that was in camp earlier, the one that had the dog. I don't know where everybody else was. The rest of the campers were all right, being debriefed somewhere. And he saw us and he came over to see what we were doing. So he said we were sky watching. And I said, were you here because of the UFO? And he said, no, I don't know anything about that. But he didn't ask anything about it either. And I felt that was a little bit strange. So we spoke for about 5 or 10 minutes. I discovered he was a close protection officer, obviously security for the camp, when the rest of the campers returned. And this is where it gets interesting. He's opened the gate and let them through, and they've all gone back to their camp. And then 2 minutes later, he's come back to me. How long will you be here? I said, well, I will be here for as long as the sky is clear, really. And he said, well, you know, my commanding officer's not going to like that. Well, I didn't know Vodafone had a commanding officer, or carry guns for that matter. So I said, I'd really like to meet him. He said, well, I'll have to go and tell him. I'll have to go and get him. I said, fine. I said, you go and get him. And me and Steve looked at each other. Well, Vodafone don't have a commanding officer. So he came over. He was not a happy bunny. He was short, stocky, angry man. Have you got permission to be here? I said, I don't need permission to be here. Yes, you do. You're trespassing. I said, no, that's a public footpath. I said, the only thing the country code desires me to do is take my rubbish home. He said, no. He said, that's a public footpath. I said, are you serious? I said, that's 12 feet away. I said, as long as I'm not breaking the law or hurting anybody, I got a goddamn right to be here. So we had a little chat about fascism and freedom. And he didn't like that very much either. But he went away. He said, I actually like your passion. I said, passion? It's not passion. It's just being a free human being and knowing your rights as a free human being. Well, anyway, after our little conversation, and he went back to the camp with his tail between his legs, I think it was about 5 minutes, and these clouds this whole front started to come in. And when you live on top of a mountain, you know, if you see someone putting their washing out, you can see the clouds come in. Don't do it on a mountain, because the rain will be there within 5 minutes. And as it was, this weather front came in. They probably got their weather machine out to get rid of us, to be honest with you. But, you know, Steve packed up his camera and we went back to my house. And literally within 5 minutes, the heavens opened. So they would have been absolutely soaked that night. There's no way they would have done anything. Now, on this note, I will say I will leave it there, because Gary Jones, my very good friend, is going to come in and present the evidence that we found there. And I think you'll find at the end of this, it was not a military exercise. It was real life, real time, and we got the evidence to prove it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kaz. Okay, as you just heard, Kaz has told you an amazing experience. What an experience it is. Can everyone see that screen? Yeah? Okay. Right. Now, basically, I came along with Sufan about 18 months later after this event We did try and find Kaz a lot earlier than this, but the real trouble was everywhere I looked, I couldn't find her. Tried to find her on Facebook, tried to look at other groups, maybe they could point me in the right direction, but for some reason, even when I typed in her true name, because in order to type on Wales online, you have to have a Facebook account or something similar to sign in with. But every time I typed it in or looked for something in the links, nothing would come up. So it took a while, but then later on there was an event that Soufont did, and that's how we were able to find Kaz. And as you saw, she went into a lot of evidence, a lot of detail, a lot of things that she presented to you. One of the things she pointed out was her polygraph test. Now, I just want to speak about this before I get on to what I want to show you. The polygraph test, as you can see, based on the questions, there was no deception indicated and it was truthful. That's the examiner's opinion and many others who corroborated with her. Now, that makes Kaz a first-class witness as far as I'm concerned, because she fought for that polygraph test. She really fought for it where no one else would probably just say, oh, I'll give you my statement and leave it at that. And that would be good enough for some people, not for Kaz. She fought really hard for it. You know, she wanted everyone to know that what she'd seen is real. So that just makes Kaz a first-class witness. And there's something else you should realize here. When you're doing an investigation, you're asking a lot of questions, especially something in detail and in-depth as this. You ask a lot of questions, and sooner or later, if someone is lying to you, you're going to find them out. They're going to rehash something, they're going to reinvent something, they're going to have to totally change their story in certain parts, and eventually you're just going to realize, sorry, I don't believe you, you're not telling the truth. But in this case, Kaz has always been straight down the line, always answered every question, never failed once. Now, what I'm going to show you is evidence that myself, Mike Maunder, and Emlyn Williams of Soufont collected, and with Kaz and her friends, who I call the Pentyrch 4, the Pentyrch Incident, the Pentyrch 4, I think you get it. Anyway, they initially did their own investigations. We came along a lot later and we decided, okay, this is where we need to go. So we start with EMF evidence. Now, Kaz mentioned about EMF readings and EMF damage to the trees. This actually gave us a good starting point because we decided once we knew what we were looking for, or what we wanted to start doing, was to go into these fields, take an EMF meter and have a look around and see if we could find any unusual signs. Because anyone who's ever done a UFO investigation or anyone who's ever read a book or studied it will know if they appear in a field or in a forest or on a mountain somewhere, for some reason, they always leave behind these very strange high EMF readings. You can actually find them if you have a meter. And this particular meter, it's a very affordable one. You can go into any electronic store and purchase it. And this one scans in micro Tesla. Now, I'll get to that later on, but the number flashes when it gets above 0.4 because according to the studies and the people who make these devices, they actually say that 0.4 long-term is very harmful to humans. Okay? And it works indoors and out. And as you can see there, that's Mike Maunder with a metal detector, because one of the things we wanted to make sure is that when we were getting a beep or a scan or something, we wanted to make sure there was no power lines underneath us, no metal or anything that would give us a false reading, because if you get a false reading, you know, it's going to affect the results later on. And a little bit of a funny story here. As you can see, there is a power cable. Now, Emlyn, who had one of those devices in his hand, right, he was walking along like this, and all of a sudden, wow, big reading. I said, look above you, mate. There's a power line above his head. But that actually just told us that at least this thing was working. Okay, that was a good little field test there. Now, I'm just going to play this little video, just to give you an idea, because by the time we were scanning these fields, and we did it at least 4 or 5 times at least, and every time we got a reading, the reader would get smaller and smaller and smaller. So it came a point where we had to start mapping out where the signals were coming from. And it's a very simple process. You can just get some canes, some sticks, some ribbons, something just to mark out. Oh, sorry? Oh, I do apologize. Okay, yeah, this is just running along the fields there. We got quite a number of readings on this, more than we could possibly count. So, as I said, we got a lot of readings, and they started to decay as time went on. So if this was natural, you would expect it to stay the same. But this is actually something artificial because it's decaying all the time. Now, these are just some pictures of what we did. As you can see the ribbons again. You can see that dead tree that Kaz was talking about. Look, that one has the life sucked out of it. This is the bush. Actually, about 1.5 years, maybe 20 months after the area was actually investigated by us. This is where that red barrel, the one that was 30 feet above and looking down through Kaz and Dave. If you look there, look, all those trees, the leaves on them, they're very green. But then when you get to this area where this signal came from, that tree is dead. No life in it at all. I mean, it started to grow back now, but as you can look there, there's nothing on it. Yet all the other bushes are perfectly fine. Some evidence there, I reckon. Just to get to the gorse bushes, as Kaz was talking about earlier, this is what we call the bald patch. Because out of all the area in this field, there's all this weeded grass, this snake grass, I think it's called. But this area here, it's about the size of a penalty spot, penalty box, or something on a football field like that. And this area is where that lightning came down. When Kaz said about the lightning at the corner of the ship, that is actually where it is. Now, I'll just tell you a story about this. Because Mike Maunder had the EMF meter in his hand, and towards that top spot there, when he was just standing still, the thing was just going up like fireworks. Beep, 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 beep. Too many readings for us to get, and they were touching as high as one UT, which may not sound a lot in units, but it is very high for this particular device to register. So let me just show you what we came up with when we finally mapped it out and we knew what we were looking for. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of readings there. And I've drawn this map up here now, right, just so I give you an idea of what it is you're looking at. Now, this is the first gate here. It's the first field, second field, third field. This Pentyrch Road. That'll come into play in a bit. Now, as you see up here, this is the gate entrance. That's the gate. We got two readings there of 0.45 and 0.6. That's the two areas where those two barrels actually were, according to the witnesses. That's where we found them. And there are some other ones here. Look, this red little patch here, this patch here, and this patch here, which forms a rather interesting little line from top to bottom. But you can see, again, the readings were like 0.2, 0.5, again, 0.4, 0.5. But on the very first time we were there, they were as high as 0.8. But as I said, they've started to decay after time. So it would be interesting to go back in those fields and try it again, because we may not get as many hits this time, because as I've said, the signal is starting to diminish. But what I want to point out to you is this line here, because this is the interesting one. This leads from the corner of the second field, through the trees, up the hill to the third field, turns, and ends up on that bald patch here. That's where that bald patch is. And just look at the number of readings we got. That's more than what I was actually able to write down, but we got loads, dozens and dozens of them. That's the bald patch readings down there. And you can see from the readings themselves, again, they're all very consistent. Some of them are quite high, 0.58, 0.56, got some 0.61. And then you get down to where the area was up by here. You got some like 0.77, 0.67. They are quite high. That is very high for an outdoor field with no electrics in it whatsoever, unless something put it there. But what's interesting about this reading is what you have to understand is that is the exact path that Kaz and a neighbour, especially Kaz, said that this thing took. It came down in a counterclockwise pendulum-like motion, swooped over this field to the tree line, turned back, and that's where that lightning came down. Now ask yourself this. How can you put a signal trail like that in a field if it wasn't something that came from something that could have been a UFO? It's not artificial. That is artificial. That's not natural. That's a good piece of evidence, I reckon. If you started from the bottom of the hill and worked your way more to the top of this area, that was probably the more focalized area, I would say, yeah, where the big lightning came down. Okay. Now, this is just an idea of how big this craft is. It doesn't necessarily mean it was this big, but as Kaz has already told you, if you looked at the bottom, you couldn't see the top and vice versa. So if you measure the distance from this field here to this field here, that gives you an idea of 282 feet. Now, if you sort of measure it from where it starts to turn up into this corner, that gives you a size of around 530 feet. So if you measure it all together, you have a size of 963 feet from start to the top there. Now, the craft didn't move that far away to each other. Didn't move that far, so Kaz has said that this thing was absolutely huge. And this is the real interesting one I like by it, because where those signals were, I said, at the back, you match them all up. Look at this square feet area that it actually covers. 46,884 feet. That is a phenomenal size for anything to be floating in a field. So that just gives you some idea of what you're looking at. Now, I said about Pentyrch Road. Pentyrch Road is that road that sits just above those fields. Now, this is something interesting because Mike Henry, potential third witness. This is someone who posted a comment on a place called South Wales Awakening, 6th of March 2016, so it's just over a week after the event has actually happened. Okay? He's posted a comment, and have a look what he says. I mean, I'll try and read the whole thing. It was Thursday night into Friday morning, things hotted up. Now he says, Wednesday afternoon, I noticed an AWACS tracking plane circling our area while I was cleaning the car. That's an E3 Sentry plane. We call it an E3 Sentry, the Americans would call it an AWACS. Okay, where were we? Now by 1 a.m. early Thursday morning, started to get a bit worried as to what was really happening. Anyways, fell asleep, and guess what? He was still there the next morning and all day into the night. I was taking the dog for a quick walk before bed just after midnight, Thursday along Chinnacoid Road, while watching the plane in the sky, and from nowhere, another plane appeared and joined the circle, followed by 2 more, and there were now 5 large planes all in the same circle, so I watched because I thought that was strange. What did Cass tell you? All these planes started coming in, all these planes started to join a circle. Now if you just move on a bit here, he says at one point now, I thought it was strange, with a bright red pulsing light, then another, which formed the shape of a triangle. Come down from the clouds in the middle of the circle. As it got lower, it lit up with more pulsing red lights. The one side, yeah, remember? Came down very low and looked very large indeed. I don't think it touched down totally, but about 10 to 12 feet from the ground and lit up fully, showing the full outline. Then it dimmed down to black, and red and green orbs came from it. That's what Dave said he saw. Kaz said she didn't see that part, but she saw the green one that came floating about above. But this craft here had smaller ones coming from its body, somewhere below or somewhere around that area. But Dave saw it. I think Mike Hembry saw it, but Kaz didn't. But everything was so fixated, as you can imagine. Quite a lot going on there. So, just to get to the point, he said he'd seen enough by this time. He didn't know who was more scared, his dog. He hurried home. I think he'd seen something he shouldn't, sleep for hours and hours. But then by 4 a.m., there was an almighty explosion in the distance, followed by a second, 3 to 4 seconds later. And basically he says that he doesn't want to be contacted because he knows that the MOD would give him hassle. But as you can see there, but one thing I will say, they knew that was coming. That's the actions. I fully believe that. Now, as Kaz said, there was snowing in Pentyrch Fields. Well, guess what? When they went up to Smilog Woods, their friends had a camera with them, and they actually managed to capture some of this weird snow that was in the same area, but just localized to where that crash site was. So let me just play it. It takes a sec. And if you look there, look, there's no sign of any snow or any weather forecasted for that day or any other week. See the burns, look? Snap canopies. You see some of the broken trees. Obviously not a very good cameraman he was, but got some cracking footage. But look at it, I mean, listen to it. It sounds very heavy, very like hailstones, like pebbles or something. I mean, look at it. I mean, it's like a blizzard, man. You wouldn't want to be caught in that. I'll just let it play for a little bit, but I mean, that was just 1 or 2 days after the event. Localized to that area, and I never heard anyone talk about snow except if you were standing in that area. Yeah. Well, anyway, so as time went on, we decided that also we wanted to do some more of this field work up in Smilog Woods. So again, we took the meter. Again, it registers at 0.4 above. And as you can see, there are some of our flags. Look, when we scanned around this area, and the surrounding areas around the fields and where the trees had been felled and everything, and this is what we came up with. Now, Smilog is actually, as you know, owned by the National Forestry Commission. But it's also a bike trail which they build for the people that ride their bikes down. They like to ride these things. They get a lot of fun out of it. These blue lines represent those trails, right? Now, interesting enough, there's a ramp that used to be in this little spot here. One of the witnesses who I spoke to, his name was Oscar Green, and he actually is an avid mountain bike rider. He likes to ride his ramp and jump up and all that stuff. He saw the E3 Sentry that night, and he said he took his friends up to this area about the following morning to ride down the bikes, and that ramp of his had been smashed to pieces. It was fine the day before, but the day after, when this whole thing had just taken place, his ramp was completely smashed to pieces. So that's another piece of evidence that just confirms something impacted this area and made a lot of damage. Now, just want you to understand what you're looking at here. We did a grid reference search of the fields, and we did it the same thing here, look. Left and right like that, and up and down, just to make sure we got everything absolutely perfect. I want you to notice something here. This yellow line you can see the readings there. This yellow line, right, leads right into the impact site. That's where the impact site is. And as you can see, the readings again. But what's also interesting, and there's no particular reason I can think of, except if they actually, military, pulled something out of this area, it would have gone along, they would have dragged it along here, ready to be airlifted, because that's where I was getting a few more signals. No other place. I scanned this area, and this area. I got absolutely nothing except for this. So I reckon that's where the military must have dragged whatever it was and stashed it along here, ready for load, and I'll get to that later. But one more thing, because remember what Cass said about the common and the explosion happening there? If you follow that line back, it'll go all the way back to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, right into the area of the common. And by the time you get one explosion, right, and if this thing was going fast enough, by the time 3 or 4 seconds, that's enough time for it to cover this distance and slam into that area. So that's something I find really interesting. Now, just so you understand where I'm going with all this, this is a chart telling you how dangerous or what levels EMF can actually get on certain household devices. Now, you don't need to be too tech with this, but 1 milligas, which is what this thing measures in, is 0.1 in microtesla. So you divide by 10 or times by 10 what I was using. And just to give you an idea, look, 1 to 25 is 0.1 to 2.5 in the device that I was using. And if you look down here, microwave oven, 1 to 25, 0.1 to 2.5, and I was getting readings as high as 0.5, 0.7, and up to 1. So basically, when you're walking through those fields, you're being microwaved. And I'll tell you something now, right? I've been in that field at least 10 times, and every time I come from there, I feel like my face is on fire, my skin is going to drop off, I get headaches, I get all kinds of old problems, which I cannot cure with any rest or painkillers or anything else. I just feel like physically sick. And a lot of people have said that. There are some people who are really sensitive. They go in there and they feel like they've been kicked in the stomach by a horse. You know, it's not a pleasant experience. And just if you want to understand about where I'm going with this, there's that website for the study that I used. Now, seismological evidence in the military timeline. This is something that I spent quite a bit of time putting together because the reports were that there were 2 massive explosions. Many people reported 1 massive one at least. Some people said 2, but the first one was unanimous. Many, many people reported it. So I basically thought, okay, many people who have experienced some sort of large explosion in a UFO sighting previously, like the Berwyn Mountain, for instance, someone suggested maybe looking at the British Geological Survey, so that's exactly what I did. I wrote a Freedom of Information request. I sent it to the British Geological Survey. I looked for the dates from the 22nd to the 20th because I didn't want to be exact. I didn't want to make sure I was giving myself away, or I want it for that particular day so I don't get found out. No, I want it for that particular day. So I just spread it out over the week. And when I got the results back, that's the whole 26th day. And as you can see from 4 o'clock, this green line here represents from 4:15 to 4:30. And sometime after 4 o'clock, people said there was an explosion. And look right there. There's the signal. 40 miles away, northeast direction from Lantrisant. And that signal was registered around 4:21, roughly the time many people said they'd heard these explosions happening. Recorded on a seismological graph. And it's interesting because one particular Freedom of Information Act said that these were simulated explosions. Simulated. And they're shaking hospitals and waking people up in their beds. Like, I don't think so. Now, this is something that can't be explained by the military. 10 minutes after this explosion happens, roughly 10 minutes, an Apache gunship had to make an emergency landing in Cardiff Airport. So 10 minutes now has gone by, and this thing has had to fly roughly from the Common to Cardiff Airport because that was the closest one. St. Athens is only about another half mile away, but it had to look for the closest one, and the reason for it is because it had to just make, as I said, make an emergency landing with smoke coming out of the cockpit. What caused the damage? An Apache gunship I've looked into, and it's one of the most powerful, reliable helicopters you'll ever find, and yet on a military exercise it fails completely. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. So I asked them, could you just explain to me what's the signal for? What's it all about? And just to cover this part here says, basically, as discussed in a previous reply, this may result from human activity such as traffic or machinery. So that's the only explanation. It's from the South Wales area, and the explanation I got from them was it had to be traffic or machinery, and the only thing in the air that night was the military. So definitely the military done this. Now, Linda Moulton Howe basically got involved in this later on. She seen the story, was really impressed, wanted to look more into it. And after we sort of like exchanged emails and sent some information, she has written some reports. They're on the Earth Files website of hers. She went on Coast to Coast and spoke about it there. But she also sent us a nice email. She said, Gary, I think what happened in Wales in February 2016, a year ago, was not a southern leg of the Scotland border military exercise. It has all the earmarks of what whistleblowers have told me since the 1980s and 90s about a secret war between human military forces and an alien presence. That's Linda Moulton Howe. But how to prove it firsthand if the military won't talk on record? However, you and Kaz and Mike et al. Have laid out more than most cases have, and I am looking forward to broadcasting at Earth Files and Coast to Coast AM on Thursday, December 21st, 2017, and whatever substantial feedback I receive, I will forward to you and Mike. And this nice note here, Kaz is to be commended for coming forward with her intelligent and detailed observations. Please give her my best. Okay. And that's just the show that she went on later on. So if you want to go listen to it, this is where you'll find it. Now, after hearing the broadcast, one of the people who actually listened to it decided to send Linda Moulton Howe another email. And she said that she'd listened to the show, she'd listened to us and me and Kaz talk, but this is what is interesting. But here, look. I would believe it was around 2 o'clock, although she's going back from memory over nearly 2 years, it actually happened around 4. But listen to what she said here. When I heard an extremely loud explosion, which sounded like it was right outside the hospital. It was. This was then followed by a smaller explosion, which sounded a little distance away from the hospital. Now, Smilog Woods, from that site that I just pointed out to you, it's only about a mile away. So it would have been in the distance. It would have been over the mountain area. And she just said, I was on duty with 2 other people who are exactly the same as myself. I have combat experience in the British Armed Forces. I can tell the difference between a bang and an explosion. So that's someone in the RAF who knows about military. Now, this is where the military I find very strange, because I've found out typically when they hold Exercise Chameleon, it happens up in the northern parts of England, a base called RAF Leeming. Now this website, fightercontrol.co.uk, is a very good source of information. These are people who are like train spotters and plane spotters. Well, these are like military enthusiast spotters, if you will. And they like to go to the airport, the airfields, the MOD, RAF sites, and basically watch the planes take off and land. They have like these devices that can scan the actual tail number and tell you what the vehicle registration is. So you know exactly who's doing what, where and when at any given time, because they log it. It's like a flight log of their own they keep. Now, let me just show you. You can see on the 17th, look, 2016, so we're talking at least 9 days before. Just check Lehman NOTAM and notice that a NOTAM is out for Exercise Chameleon. It's due to start Friday, that's the 19th, and run next week. And as I said, typically it takes place up in the northern parts of England. And it's just some more emails quickly that someone posted. Just had 2 Chinooks coming from northern parts of Scotland. That's why Linda Moulton Howe said the Scotland area, because Chinooks were starting to come down and head towards RAF Leeming. And then, as we end into Sunday now, still a few days away, some of the planes that are landing and some of the helicopters that are landing are now being assigned certain register. Is that correct there? Nope. This is what I wanted to show you. These are the call signs that they had. Every single one of them had a certain call sign. Now, there's 2 up there you got to pay attention to. Snake 48 and Jackal 1. As you can see, this is on the Monday. Those are the 2 planes that were circling around for those 3 days. That's their call signs, Snake 48 and Jackal 1. And there they are down with it if you want to take a look. And just a few more, look. Quite a lot of practice and effort going into this little exercise, isn't it? They're doing tandem drops, they're doing parachute drops and everything else. But this is where it starts to get interesting. Looking at the Plane Finder website, this is the Tuesday. This is 20 to 6, 3 days before the event, and one of the planes has already taken off. He's head down to England. He's gone down to the southern part near Plymouth, and he started circling around there. And then he takes a bit of time and comes up and starts circling around just a bit above Plymouth, until finally he settles on coming up to Lantriston, where he stays for the full 3 days. And at the same time, his friend is starting to join him, and this is where they start to begin the very unusual behavior that Kaz and her neighbors have noticed during that time. Now, just to give you a few more ideas, because a lot of military power and vehicles are starting to be put together for this exercise, which in itself is rather strange, because normally they just have a few things happen, and then a few things come after that, but on this particular night, they just put it all together. Now, those are the 3 Chinooks that were involved in the night. And this is just, let me think, yeah. This is just a part of Dave's statement, because he said by the 24th, he woke up to the same noise, and once again, that plane stayed circling all day to start to wonder, are we under some sort of threat with world tensions as they are? That night, went to bed with the sound of the plane echoing over our houses. By 11:45, I was pissed off. With it so, I decided to email local MAD a shitty email, pardon his language, about their plane keeping me and my neighbours awake. They didn't reply to my email at all. Basically, the MOD have never said anything about these planes at all, even though they were emailed and asked about by many other people. Now, this is the night just before, this is Thursday, leading up to the night now that follows through to the Friday morning. This is the NOTAM, which is a Notice to Air Military or Notice to Air Management. I think that's what it stands for. And it just says, exercise Chameleon, up to 7 hours, starting from about 9 o'clock and ending 7 o'clock Friday morning. So by now they already got their forces in place, they've got their people in place, and they're ready to start looking in this area, because I know that they're ready for something. That's what my gut instinct tells me. Now, something that I find very unusual with the MOD is that when they list all their exercises, this is the website link here, they have a date when it was added and when it was actually going to commence. But for this particular day, the 25th, they've added a new MOD-sponsored air exercise, but they've got no commence date. Like they just slapped it in there and said, okay, just make sure our records are up to date, but don't tell anyone what it's about. And then where's the one for the 19th? There's one for the 18th here, but remember it said it would start on the Friday? So it just didn't seem like they were ready to list this one. And this is when the night really starts to heat up. This is now, the location is edge of the Brecon Beacon, South Wales. These are some of the actual vehicles that I identified taking part in all this. There you can see 4 helicopters, 2, what are they? I can't see the name of the planes. Anyway, those are the 2 Hercules airplanes, heavy lifting gear for soldiers, lifting gear, equipment, and they were all there that night, ready and waiting. Now, remember what we said about the E3 Sentries? Question is, how do you identify them? Well, the same way I identified all the others. This is Bryce Norton. This was just the Friday morning after the exercise had taken place. This is one here. Look, ZH101. It was parked up on the Friday, and that was one of the E3s in the area, because there were actually 2 in the area at that time. That's the other one that Kaz showed you earlier. This was on the Thursday morning. Remember when Mike Hembury said that he had seen an AWACS plane circling around on the Wednesday, and it was still there in the Thursday morning? That was the one that was circling. Now, what exactly does an E3 Sentry and this other particular plane here have in common? This is something that I learned. It stands for ISTAR, which is actually Intelligence, Surveillance, Targeting, Acquisition, and Reconnaissance. Basically, it's an information command center in the sky. This particular plane was brought into service a couple of years ago, and it was upgraded with all kinds of technology, and I can't find out anything about it. It's more secretive than the E3 Sentry, which I find quite surprising. But let's just take a look at what the actual capabilities of an E3 Sentry are. First of all, it has a 360-degree radar dish, which looks at the land, sky, and sea. It has satellite surveillance, electronic jamming and scanning equipment. It has air command with up-to-date information, and tactical support targeting enemy and certain countermeasures. Anything your enemy is doing or anything you want to know up to date, it's circling around, informing you people on the ground or those who are ready in place to attack or whatever. Remember what we said about the phones? One of the things that people have asked us is, why didn't you get photographs? Why didn't you photograph it? Well, you were right there with a phone. Well, they tried. They tried very much so. They were like, that, switch on, for crying out loud. The phone wouldn't switch on. And I have two explanations for this, but I think this is the most reasonable one, is that E3 Sentry was sending out some sort of signal to stop those phones working. Because since then... Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is actually Dave's phone by here. He's put new batteries in it. He's tried new connectors with it. It will not switch on. And the reason why I think that this phone is no longer going to work is because he had photographs of the scrap metal that was on the common that day, and he had certain messages he was sending that night about up-to-date information, about what things were going on. One thing that you don't know as well is that Kaz, her laptop was hacked. Dave's phone was hacked. A lot of their information was taken away. No one knows why or how, but it had to do something with this, I reckon, because they were looking down on them. Not long after this craft has now disappeared and the green one shot off in the direction of Lantrisant. So anyone who wants to know why they didn't get photographs or why the information is so scarce is because a lot of it was destroyed on that night by the military themselves, I reckon. Now, this is a picture that Dave actually done because he said he saw all these other orbs and other things coming out of the craft, and he's just done a little animation here, which I'll play for you. This is something he said he saw. Look, see the... Oop, damn it, sorry. Again. This is what he said he saw. Look, the three lights coming down, turning. Then it lit up. Then all these other orbs came out of it. More green ones, and there's that big green one there, look. That's what he said he saw. Do you want to play it again for you one more time? So you get an idea of what you're looking at? I think that would have been amazing to get on film, that would have. It's a shame. Anyway, these are the Chinook helicopters and the Apaches. I mean, I gotta just ask one question, right? Why does a military exercise need so much firepower? I mean, one of these things is capable of taking out a squadron of tanks and trucks, and you got three of them, and basically, that can level a small part of a city. These things are seriously dangerous if you know how to use them correctly, but yet one of them had to make a forced landing because of an exercise. Now, just again, I want you to look at this, just to remind you, the Apache there at 4:34, the signal at 4:21, because one of these helicopters did something interesting. This is ZK559, and basically from around 4:24 from St. Athan, it took off just 3 minutes after the explosion, and then headed off in the direction of Lantrisant, Smilog Wood area, the common. And it came back about 4:50, headed back that way after 7 minutes past 5, came back again, and then departed one more time. So it made 3 round trips going back and forwards from Smilog Woods not long after this explosion took place. What was it bringing back? What was it taking there? What was it going there for? Makes you wonder. And just to show you that Dave was still witnessing things that night, he said, at this point now, I could only see 2 Apaches, but could hear twin rotor Chinooks coming from at Athens in the distance. They were flying back to start, Athens then back to Lantrisant as if they were transporting something. This was very loud. Whatever they shot down, I reckon that's what it was carrying. Now, this is something that came along a bit later. Mike Mondo, who's one of the researchers, he found this really interesting comment that was made on one of our group pages. I've left the name blank because I don't think I want to reveal the names unless people want me to. But he said, in relation to this event, you will find that the best source of information will be the aviation enthusiasts or amateur radio hams, which I just pointed out to you. If aircraft such as AWAC type or aircraft were in the air around these days, these people will know. As a kid, I grew up around loads of them near Cardiff Airport and at St. Athan, and they missed nothing. On this subject, the other movement, apart from Gunship 2's emergency landing, which was the Apache gunship, one other interesting was the departure of BEA 146 from RAF Northolt. Nothing out of Northolt is boring, and flights from there to Cardiff Airport are very, very rare and unscheduled. That aircraft does not only fly high-level benefits claimants, its call sign, Kitty Hawk, is a UK military-specific, and it moves all sorts of people around, such as royal families, higher-ranking military people working in top-secret projects, that kind of thing. And just on that day, there they are, look, arriving at St. Athan just a few hours after this event. There's the plane, there's the log for it, look. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? High-level profile people, huge military aircraft, lots of resources, explosions, and all kinds of things rocking buildings, smoke. Oh, that's something I forgot to mention. When that thing landed in Smilog, there was a lot of smoke coming from the area and the smell of sulfur filling the hospital and people's houses. You know, so a lot of people were quite worried that a bomb had actually gone off in the hospital and there was some sort of attack had taken place. And what kind of exercise would allow them to actually use live ammunition? I mean, that's a question, again, you got to ask. Unless they were involved in something that they don't want us to know. Now, just one more thing, because by this point, we were getting to understand now who was making decisions, who was doing what, where, and when. And I thought it would be a good idea at this point, because I needed to know what orders were given to shut the roads down. Because when Smilog had the impact, not long after that, very quickly, all those roads were shut down. There's only one access road there, and what was it, Cass? The M4? Yeah, the main road through Lantris there, the M4, I think. Anyway, all the other roads surrounding it and the pathways, you couldn't get in there. The military had shut them down very, very quickly. Without warning, I don't even think they were planning on it, but they shut it down anyway. So I wanted to know who gave this order. And if they're not, this military was actually notified for people so that they knew this thing was going to take place in the middle of the night over a residential area. Okay, the Cwmtarth University Health Board, which runs Royal Glamorgan Hospital, I just asked them, could you please provide me with information as to whether the Royal Glamorgan Hospital received prior notification to this exercise and what precautions or measures were taking place, just in case something went wrong or something went bad. I would imagine they'd do that. Their response was, no emergency measures, services, and procedures were undertaken as no information was passed to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital about this exercise. So I asked the Natural Resources Body for Wales, who were in charge of Smilog Woods. If anyone would know, these people would. I asked them, why was Smilog Woods closed down? What was the reason for the military being there? Whose authority was, and so on. Their response was this. There was no permission granted to the military to close the woodland and public paths and let off explosives in the woodlands mentioned during these dates, or in fact any dates, so we have no records. Let me see. This type of activity would have required permission, so if it had occurred, we would have had a record. No records exist. Therefore, Regulation 12.4, environmental regulations apply, information is not held. Good one. I know, maybe I should. Dear Vodafone, what were you up to? Do you always use E3s for a phone? Anyway, I wrote to the Royal Mint because someone had suggested that the Royal Mint was heavily involved in this exercise, or that may have been the source of the exercise. So I got them to write me back. Whilst we received prior notification of the training exercise you refer to from the Welsh Extremism Counter-Terrorism Unit, you know, couldn't make this up, the Royal Mint had no involvement in respect of the exercise whatsoever, and our premises were not used in any way. So they had nothing to do with it, basically. This exercise had no impact on our security systems or alarms, and any road closures no effect on us either. So they had nothing to do with it. And I don't know what the Welsh Counter-Extremism Unit is all about anyway, but... So I wrote to the South Wales Fire Service because there was a fire, there was smoke. I would imagine some sort of emergency services would be needed there. Could you please provide me again with what information and notifications? Following investigation, the service holds no information in relation to what the matter you detailed in your request. What's going on here? Oh, this gets good. This one, right? I thought, well, by this time now, the only thing that's left is the people who actually are in charge of forcing laws on the roads, and that's the South Wales Police. So I did, this time, actually get a bit more detailed in my Freedom of Information request. I asked quite a few things. I wanted to know about records. Do you have records? Can I have copies of those records? And the usual questions. Whose idea was it, or whose order was it, to close the roads down, basically? And as you see their response date, this is their response. Your request for information has now been considered, and I am not obliged to supply the information you have requested. In relation to your particular request, the following exemption applies. Section 14.1, vexatious request. It means basically causing tendance or to cause annoyance, frustration, or anything of that matter. I am asking about a road closure 2 years ago, whose order it was, and they're basically telling me that's too much work for them. Oh, sorry. I don't need. That's too much worry. I can't get off my ass to do anything there. But I mean, it's really strange because I've done dozens of freedom of information requests, and the usual 3 responses I get are information not held, partially successful, or successful. I've never had that. So that tells me that they really are hiding something from us. I'm still looking into that. Well, basically, that's the end of some of the information we have. There's a lot more available on the website, and I'll show you the links to those after if you'd like. But let's just sort of wrap it up into a, what's the word? We'll just basically finalize what we've looked at here. We're basically saying the conclusion is this, that this was not a military exercise. First of all, what were those 3 planes doing there? Sorry, those 2 planes doing there, circling for 3 days with no notification or any sort of idea from the MOD? What were those explosions going off in the common? Why was it necessary to close down Smilog Woods? Why is it that we were not notified in any attempt to get notification or any idea? This is either blocked or not information not held. What's with all the EMF signals? Why are we finding damaged trees in both Smilog Woods and in the fields of Pentyrch? Why was the airspace closed down? Why did this helicopter had to make emergency landing? Why was there such an incredible signal, or a small signal but registered enough, over a residential area which caused a loud explosion which really shook some people up? You know, what was this green object doing? What was the snow all about? I mean, these are things that I really, really, really wonder about. Okay? Just to sort of like show you one more thing now, I'm going to hand you back to Kaz, because she's got a little prize in store for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll bring you back to Kaz Clark, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. That was brilliant. I won't keep you too much longer. I just want to try and share something with you. This was written for me by a lady called Claire Schultz, specifically based on my statement, and was given to me. And I can stand here all day and tell you what happened. And Gary can stand here all day and tell you the evidence. But if I can get you to feel a fraction of what I felt that night, then I've done my duty as a human being to you all. So if you bear with me, these are the 4 minutes. We've just done a presentation on 4 minutes that changed my life. And it happened as quick as this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.